Welcome to the fourth part of my video series on extinction events throughout Earth's history. Today, we're diving into the Carboniferous Period, the second longest period of the Phanerozoic Eon. Now, none of the extinctions from this period make the top 5 list, but don't let that fool you. This period saw the first known extinction events among terrestrial organisms. By the end of the Carboniferous, the great forests that once dominated the planet had vanished, and that didn't happen without major consequences for life on Earth. If you haven't seen the earlier parts of this series, don't worry, this video stands on its own. But if you're curious, check out my playlist for a full deep dive of Earth's mass extinctions. Also, you'll find a document in the video description listing sources for images and research papers I used. Before we dive into the extinction events, let's first set the scene for the turbulent times to come. The Carboniferous Period began 359 million years ago, right after the end of Devonian extinctions. It lasted for 60 million years, ending around 299 million years ago. By the end of this period, most of Earth's land masses had merged, forming the supercontinent of Pangaea. To the east lay the Paleotethys Ocean, while the vast Panthalassa Ocean surrounded them both, covering most of the planet. But what really defined this period? Forests. Massive, sprawling, swampy forests. These were so vast that much of the coal we mine today came from plants that thrived in the Carboniferous. That's why it's sometimes called the Age of Coal. In fact, the very name Carboniferous means coal-bearing, a fitting title for a period that left behind some of the planet's richest fossil fuel deposits. So, what kind of plants formed the massive coal forests? Some have modern relatives, but these are a mere shadow of their former selves. Take the horsetails, for example. Today, they survive as a single genus, Equisetum, with species reaching a modest 2 to 5 meters or 6 to 16 feet tall. But in the Carboniferous, the tree-like calamities could grow up to 50 meters or 160 feet tall, taller than a 15-story building. Then there were the club mosses. Today, they're tiny ground plants, with the tallest getting no more than a meter or 3 feet tall. But back then, species like Lepidodendron were towering trees, 30 meters or 98 feet high, with trunks 1.5 meters or 5 feet in diameter. But what would be the most recognizable group for a modern audience? The ferns. The fronds from the Carboniferous ferns looked shockingly similar to modern ones, suggesting that they have not changed much in over 300 million years. Of course, there are differences here as well. Most ferns in the Carboniferous got a lot larger than most ferns today. They had thick, woody trunks, and while some ferns today still exhibit this, they are far less common. However, not all Carboniferous plants had survivors. Take the scale trees in Lepidodendrales, for example. These were cousins to the ferns, known for their scaly appearance. These towering giants grew up to 50 meters or 160 feet high. But unlike modern trees, their scales were not bark, but instead leaf scars left behind as old foliage fell away. And then we have the Chordatails, the early ancestors of modern seed-bearing trees. These were the precursors to conifers, sporting needle-like leaves and cone-like seeds. While they thrived in dry environments, some species adapted to the swamp forests, hinting at the evolutionary shift that would reshape Earth's flora in the coming ages. These forests weren't just lush and sprawling, they were teeming with animal life. By this time, terrestrial arthropods had diversified into giant forms that would seem almost alien today. Centipedes and millipedes scurried through the leaf litter, while insects dominated the skies, and both had to fear the arachnids filling the role of apex predators. Now, as I talk, you might be imagining modern insects in these roles, as these groups are still alive and well today. So, let me give you a little reality check. How long is a modern millipede? While they can be pretty small, on the larger end they can get up to 35 centimeters or 14 inches long. That seems like a decent size. So how long were they in the Carboniferous period? Well, let me introduce you to Arthropleura. This titanic millipede cousin is the largest land arthropod known and reached lengths of over 2.5 meters or 8 feet. Imagine walking through a forest and seeing a creature the size of a small car scuttling past you. As for those flying insects, The dragonfly-like Meganeura was actually of an extinct lineage of insects known as the griffin flies. It had a wingspan of 75 centimeters or 2.5 feet, comparable to a barn owl, making it the largest flying insect ever known. Meanwhile, the giant scorpion Pulmonoscorpius was an apex predator on the ground. It reached lengths of 70 centimeters or 2.3 feet, making it one of the largest scorpions ever found. But why were these arthropods so huge? The answer lies in oxygen levels. The Earth's atmosphere at this time had 35% oxygen, far higher than today's 21%. This allowed arthropods, which rely on passive diffusion to breathe, to grow far larger than anything we see today. The Carboniferous does have a second nickname, the Age of Amphibians. These vertebrates dominated the Carboniferous landscape, before being outcompeted in later periods. A particularly notable lineage of amphibians that arose during the Carboniferous was the temnospondyls. Unlike the soft-bodied modern amphibians, many temnospondyls had bony or scale-like armor and plating. Temnospondyls and other lineages of amphibians from this time were massive compared to modern amphibians. One of the largest was Eogyrinus, a 4-meter or 13-foot predator that looked like a cross between a crocodile and a salamander. Another was Diplocaulus, a bizarre amphibian with a boomerang-shaped head, possibly used for defense or hydrodynamics. But something new was also stirring, the first reptiles. Compared to the massive amphibians, these early reptiles were small and unassuming, with the largest, Crassigyrinus, only being about 2 meters or 6.5 feet long. But despite their modest size, reptiles had a key evolutionary advantage, amniotic eggs, which allowed them to reproduce away from the water, unlike amphibians. While life was booming on land, the oceans were just as diverse and strange. With the armored placoderms from the Devonian now extinct, sharks and other fish took over the role of apex predators. Some of the experimental forms from the Carboniferous were downright bizarre. For example, Helicoprion had a bizarre whorl of teeth in their lower jaw, while Acmonistion had an oddly enlarged dorsal fin. Iniopteryx was a fish with large wing-like pectoral fins, and Falcatus was a sexually dimorphic shark, where the males had an inexplicably larger mysterious dorsal spine. These, along with many others, dominated the aquatic fauna of the Carboniferous oceans and rivers. And that's not even mentioning the thriving invertebrates like sea scorpions and giant nautiloids. By now, you should have a clear picture of just how incredible the Carboniferous world was. But, as we'll see later in this video, all of this was about to change. The vast forests? Gone. The giant arthropods? Fading away. The amphibians? In decline. But before we get to what changed, we need to talk about a mystery in the fossil record. Something that isn't an extinction, but a puzzling gap in our understanding of early land vertebrates. This is Romer's Gap, a 15 million year period from about 360 to 345 million years ago, where fossils of early tetrapods are noticeably scarce. First identified in 1956 by paleontologist Alfred Romer, this gap occurs at a crucial time in evolution, right after the Devonian, when fish had begun evolving into amphibian-like tetrapods. One of the last well-known examples from before this gap is Ichthyostega, an early tetrapod from 365 million years ago. It had developed limbs and lungs, but still relied heavily on water. Then, for the next 15 million years, silence. By the time the fossil record picks back up, more advanced amphibians are thriving. So what happened during that missing time? There are a few possible explanations. The first is simple. Maybe the fossils just didn't form. Fossilization requires very specific conditions. Rapid burial, mineral-rich water, and a stable environment are typically the most important. Many early tetrapods likely lived in swampy habitats, where soft bones and slow sedimentation could make fossilization less likely. Another possibility is that the Hagenberg extinction at the end of the Devonian period wiped out many early tetrapods, leaving only a few survivors. If their numbers were low, fewer fossils would have formed in the first place. Or perhaps we've simply been looking in the wrong places, and a key fossil site remains undiscovered. That brings us to Scotland. or more specifically the Ballaghan Formation in Scotland, where recent developments have helped fill in some of Romer's gap. In 2016, researchers unearthed 5 new species from the early Carboniferous, which have since helped to shorten the length of the gap. For example, one of these species is Atonurpeton, a steam tetrapod that has helped to bridge the gap between fish and true amphibians. It had sturdy, lobe-like fins and strengthened shoulder girdles, both of which would have been important for moving around on land. It likely still spent most of its time in the water, but was a more transitional vertebrate than modern lobe-finned fish like the coelacanth. While these fossils shrink Romer's gap, they don't completely close it. Atonurpeton lived about 350 million years ago, but a stretch from 360 to 350 million years ago remains mysterious. But discoveries like Atonurpeton suggest that early tetrapods were not missing, they just rarely fossilized. Future finds may finally complete the picture of tetrapod evolution, but we will have to wait and see. Interestingly, some evidence suggests that vertebrates ventured onto land even earlier than we thought. In 2006, researchers in Poland found 397-million-year-old fossilized footprints, predating Ichthyostega by over 30 million years. While these tracks don't directly solve Romer's gap, they hint the tetrapods may have been experimenting with land much earlier than previously thought. While the mystery of Romer's gap isn't fully solved, we are steadily uncovering pieces of the puzzle. But as the Carboniferous period progressed, new challenges arose, ones that would reshape life on Earth yet again. One such challenge was the Serpukhovian Extinction, a significant but relatively short-lived event that took place between 335 to 325 million years ago. While not as well known as other mass extinctions, it primarily impacted marine ecosystems, particularly shallow water invertebrates like brachiopods and corals. These organisms thrived in vast reef systems, making it likely that this extinction was largely confined to those habitats. Estimates suggest that 10 to 30% of marine species were affected, though certain groups may have suffered much greater losses. However, due to limited fossil evidence, the full extent of this event remains debated. So, what triggered this extinction? Like many ancient die-offs, the causes are not fully understood, but several factors stand out. The first, and most significant, was a shift in Earth's climate. The Carboniferous was in the midst of a long-term cooling trend, part of the late Paleozoic Ice Age, which stretched from the Devonian period through the Permian, making it the longest ice age in Earth's history. As temperatures dropped, massive ice sheets formed at the poles, causing global sea levels to fall dramatically. This would have devastated coral reefs and the countless species that depended on them. Another possible contributor was tectonic activity. During this time, the Earth's crust was undergoing major upheaval, with mountain building events and shifts in plate boundaries altering ocean currents, nutrient flows, and underwater habitats. This disruption could have placed further stress on reef ecosystems, leading to cascading extinctions among marine invertebrates. Other factors, such as volcanic activity or ocean deoxygenation, have also been suggested, though they are unlikely to have been the primary drivers of this event. Instead, the combination of climate cooling, sea level changes, and tectonic shifts seem to have been the major force behind the Serpukhovian extinction. Though not as catastrophic as some later extinction events, this period marked an important transition in Earth's history, setting the stage for further evolutionary shifts in both marine and terrestrial life. The Serpukhovian extinction was a relatively minor event, localized and short-lived. But as the Carboniferous period neared its end, a far greater upheaval loomed, one that would dramatically reshape Earth's ecosystems. This was the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, an event that occurred around 305 million years ago. At the beginning of this video, I spent a lot of time discussing the rich forests and diverse animal life of the Carboniferous. That was no accident. Those vast rainforests, teeming with life, were about to disappear. The same environmental forces that contributed to the Serpukhovian extinction played a major role in this event as well. Earth was still in the grip of the late Paleozoic Ice Age, and as temperatures continued to drop, massive ice sheets expanded, causing global sea levels to fall. Meanwhile, tectonic shifts from the formation of Pangaea altered atmospheric patterns, leading to a drier climate with reduced rainfall. These changes devastated the rainforests and the swamps that had covered much of the land. What was once a continuous homogeneous ecosystem fragmented into isolated pockets. Many species that had thrived in the stable environment now struggled to survive. Unsurprisingly, this resulted in the mass extinction of species. Over 50% of known plant species vanished, making this one of the most severe botanical extinctions in Earth's history. The giant club mosses that once dominated the landscape disappeared, as did many of the ferns, scale trees, and other flora typical of the Carboniferous forests. With the collapse of these forests, many animals that relied on them were also severely affected. The giant arthropods like Arthropleura and Meganeura declined. This was not only due to the changing environment and loss of habitat, but also due to the secondary effect of the loss of forests. Lowered oxygen production. This spiraled into lowering the oxygen content of the atmosphere across the planet. As I mentioned earlier, such large invertebrates are reliant on abundant oxygen, and so could no longer survive in the new atmosphere. The drier climate also meant that amphibians, which had been the dominant land vertebrates, were hit hard. With their permeable skin requiring moisture for respiration, many species were driven to extinction. It is estimated that around 30 to 40% of amphibians disappeared at this time, with the survivors retreating to the few remaining humid regions. But while many species struggled, two groups flourished. The first of these is, of course, the reptiles. Reptiles first appeared during the Carboniferous, and they were far better adapted for the drier climate. Their scaly skin helped them retain moisture, but they also had amniotic eggs. Amniotic eggs were a real boon in the evolution of vertebrates on land. They had tougher shells and were able to be laid on land, unlike the eggs used by fish or amphibians. These adaptations mean that reptiles no longer rely on water and humidity to either reproduce or breathe, two fundamental functions that amphibians require water for. With these advantages, reptiles began to diversify and spread, setting the stage for their eventual domination of Earth's ecosystems. Over the next few 100 million years, they would rule the land, sea, and even the skies. The other lineage able to flourish in the changing environment was the gymnosperms. These were the successors to the moss and fern-dominated forests of the Carboniferous. Gymnosperms are trees that use exposed seeds. Unlike flowering plants, they don't use fruit to make their seeds more attractive. The gymnosperms you're probably most familiar with are the conifers like pine or fir trees, but other lineages of them include ginkgos and cycads. And these would all start to emerge around this time, or slightly later during the Permian period, and would come to dominate the landscape. The Carboniferous rainforest collapse wasn't just a mass extinction, it was a turning point in evolution. It was the first major extinction event to primarily affect land ecosystems. The fragmentation of the landscape triggered a wave of speciation as surviving species adapted to their new, fragmented environments. Speciation is the process of a species evolving into several different species due to genetic, ecological, or geographical factors. As the once continuous forests broke apart, different populations of early reptiles and plants found themselves isolated. Over time, this led to unique adaptations in different regions, a process we see echoed in later evolutionary events, such as the diversification of dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. By the time the Carboniferous period officially ended 299 million years ago, the world was a very different place. The vast swamp forests were gone, amphibians were in decline, and reptiles were on the rise. The stage was now set for the Permian period, where the changes that began here would culminate in the most devastating mass extinction in Earth's history. While the Carboniferous rainforest collapse was caused by natural climate shifts, it shares striking similarities with the environmental changes happening today. Modern deforestation and habitat destruction, often driven by human activity, are also leading to mass extinctions. Just like in the Carboniferous, species that once thrived in vast connected ecosystems are now being forced into smaller fragmented habitats, threatening their survival. Studying past extinction events like this can help us understand what might be in store for the future if similar trends continue. I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next installment of our series on mass extinctions, we'll enter the Permian period, a time of dominance, disaster, and the most catastrophic mass extinction our planet has ever seen. Next week, we'll return to one of my channel's more standard videos, with a deep dive into an African bird known for its cooperative hunting and breeding strategies. Thank you for listening, and please share your thoughts on this topic in the comments below.